everybody. Welcome back to Laser Engraving 911. So on this episode, we've got a very special guest, Riyaz from 3dcrystal.com. And the way this came about is you guys saw I put a little short up there a few weeks ago where I accidentally did some subsurface engraving. And it got me thinking, I want to know more about this technology. So I reached out to pretty much the veteran in this area, Riyaz. He specializes in subsurface engraving, and I'm sure you've seen some of his work in your travels. If you haven't, I'd be shocked. His company produces amazing 3D crystal portraits using subsurface laser engraving. He was nice enough to send me this sample here of yours truly, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Riyaz, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for taking the time to come in here and talk about the technology behind subsurface laser engraving. How are you doing today?
I'm good, Michael. Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here.
We have some samples here to talk about. We're going to talk about some technology, and we're also going to talk about your company and kind of where you're going with it. So just to get started, just to kind of break the ice a little bit, can you tell us a little bit about you and 3dcrystal.com and kind of where you guys got started?
This started actually over 20 years ago. Started kind of a little bit by accident because it was a challenge from our fourth year college professor in an entrepreneurship course to come up with a business idea. And, I was always intrigued by laser technology. I did a lot of reading and also 3D scanning in the medical world. So at that time, it was just kind of putting an idea on paper. It was nothing like what it is today, but it started on a piece of paper, and that's pretty much where it's at in my drawer as an idea that I scored a good grade on, but never really turned into a business at that time. And then I had a full-time job offer from Procter & Gamble, so I was working for them for 5 years. And as I made my way up the ladder there, I had a choice, and it was like, do I now proceed with the executive levels that they're trying to get me towards? Or there was this question in my head, like, what if I actually exercised that idea into an actual business? And so essentially, I asked for a 1-year leave of absence, very honestly telling them that this was what I wanted to try out before I dedicated and bled their logo and my life to them. And so, I took a shot at it, and that's where we are today.
It was the right shot, it sounds like. You make it sound so simple, like it was so easy, but I'm sure along the journey, just like with any other startup and any other new technology, you had your trials and tribulations 100%. During this journey to arrive where you're at today. Just kind of a high level overview of what the process is when it comes to using a laser to do subsurface laser engraving. Like what's the boiled down concept here? What are we doing?
Well, I think that what you just said is so true, because when we're creating something that doesn't exist, at that time, we couldn't just Google to try and find out, the process or how to do something. It was a challenge. And essentially, what we're doing is the starting point as far as our application is concerned is to be able to receive data that's 3D and then take that 3D data and employ laser light to have it floating inside of the crystal or transparent material. And so originally we would achieve that 3D data with medical scanners, and we would then take that data, convert it into a bunch of points, and send it to a laser. And your question specifically is on the laser side. So the best way I like to explain it is, do you remember the schoolyard using a magnifying glass to burn a leaf? Some people were maybe a little less innocent with burn ants. So it's similar to that. Is that what we're doing is we're taking laser light, we're running it through a lens, just like we did when we took the rays of the sun through a magnifying glass. What we do is we take a beam and we split that beam into multiple, call them like ray bundles, multiple beams. And then what we do is we use the lens to reconvert those beams into a focal point that's defined programmatically on the XYZ axis. And so when we define that point, those beams intersect. And at that moment, when they intersect, it exerts enough heat to burn a microfracture, which is a fancy word of crack, right? It's the microfracture or crack.
Right.
And so you end up with thousands of cracks or points later that generates this perception of whatever it is, the design is that we want to put inside. But very similar to, the dot matrix printer back in the day when you'd have a bunch of dots just printing what would appear to be text.
Right. So while this may look like a solid photo, what it really is hundreds of thousands, maybe even sometimes millions of microfractures. I also heard that they were called voxels. Is that correct? Is that another term for them? So these little tiny points, and the software that you guys had to come up with to focus into space. It's different with laser engraving here. We focus to usually a flat surface. We have one focal point and the object is either stationary or it's rotating if we're doing a cup and something like that.
Oh, yeah.
And I think a lot of our viewers are familiar with galvo type lasers that are able to split the beam like that, but we only work on one focal plane. Your software has to work on all those axes and put those points in a very specific location very quickly, not too long, and then move on to the next one. But it's doing them not one at a time, correct? It's splitting it. So it's doing kind of layers by layers in that 3D space. Is that correct?
Yeah. So essentially what's happening is that, as mentioned, it's the intersection point, and it does one intersection at a time, but it does it very quickly. When we first started, it was doing 100 points a second, which at that time, it was quite fast. And then it got to 200, and then it got to 1 killer, which was 1,000 points a second. Now, it's upwards of several thousand killers in order to, achieve the speed. The speed is not just defined by the laser. It's many times defined by the galvo. How quickly can the mirrors flicker in order to actually achieve getting the beam where it needs to be that quickly. And then you mentioned layers, there's different paths. So in order to speed out the construction of the model, we can have that laser run in different paths. So you try different things. And it goes back to your point of kind of forging new areas. And, there's a few of us that were racing to this concept of, doing what we do today. And so, the cool thing is I always believe in collaboration over competition. And when we can put minds together, share what's working, share what's not working, which is equally, if not more important, we're able to then get to, across that finish line with a product that, ends up being stellar for all parties involved.
So the software involved in getting all those points, you had to write that from scratch? Was there already something out there that you were able to start on? Or how did the software portion of getting that very specific software to put those points in space?
Yeah, good question. So there's several softwares involved. You've got the software that we talked about earlier, which is what's controlling the machine. And then you've got another software, which we came out with in, I'd say, 2015, so about 10 years ago, called Cockpit 3D. And people always ask, why is your laser called the rocket, a jet, a drone? Why is the software Cockpit 3D? It's because I like anything to do with aviation. In fact, I've spent many hours on my PPL as well. So I just had fun with it, and I kind of branded and themed the whole place to aviation. That's really the only reason why. But Cockpit 3D is the software that we have created from the ground up. And the idea was to be able to take 3D models and generate not just a 3D point cloud, but an HD point cloud. So something that would really make the image pop, be bright, be sharp. And many times people say, it doesn't matter what laser I get. I can get a laser from any manufacturer these days. It's not really necessarily just the laser itself. It's very, very important that the file that's generated is generated in a way. And what differentiates our software is the fact that we focused on resolution. And the challenge is that to get high resolution, you need to bring the points tighter together. And when you bring the points tighter together, what will happen is that it will lead to what we call cracking or melting. So while you have super, super sharp definition, because the points are so tight together, they melt into each other and they crack. And so what ends up happening, right? So what ends up happening is that to avoid the crack happening, the safe setting would be I'll give you an example, to keep the points 0.15 of a millimeter apart. So either 10th or 20th of a millimeter or 0.1 right. What we've been able to do is bring the points tighter together and avoid the cracking through a lot of testing in terms of a sort of points. So
Sure.
we're able to achieve 0.06 or 0.07, which is, double the tightness on what most other softwares would be able to do.
Wow, that's really cool. And what kind, if you know, what kind of laser is being used? Because I accidentally did subsurface engraving using the UV laser, but I've never done that with fiber laser. I've never done that with my CO2 laser, and that's why it kind of sent me off on this tailspin of what is subsurface laser engraving. So I've seen in some videos it's a green laser. It's actually visible. Is that still true, or what wavelength is it? Because
You talk about 532.
It's 532.
532, and you're right. It starts as a 1064, and actually, subsurface engraving started with 1064. The history of subsurface engraving is that it actually started with the purpose of engraving code into bottles. So think about, for example, a company like Coca-Cola. They're going to sell bottles to local buyers in bulk, trailers. And then say, for example, they change the bottle size. So all that product becomes remnant, right? And they've got a lot of remnant products. So they start offloading it. And what happens is you'll have local buyers buying it at very, very cheap prices, but then exporting it or selling it cross-border, selling it to dollar stores or places that really the intention was that it was sold to them so that they could sell it off on shelves, not so that they could resell the product. And so in order to really trace back who bought the product for us and then resold it to another country or to another customer, they started to use subsurface engraving to put some sort of tracking in it so they'd be able to see which customer, right? But, and of course, there's other, so that all started with 1064. And then you convert that 1064 over time into 532. It's a YAG laser, to answer your question. But yeah, UV lasers also do the trick. The reason we use YAG is really from a cost point of view. The difference between the output quality that we're able to see using a UV versus a green beam is not significant. The green beam has been, when you come up with something new, it means now you have to spend that much more time debugging, figuring things out, when we've achieved a position where it's excellent for the marketplace. So Sure. We're able to get nice, broad field of views. We're able to get excellent quality and great speed.
Right.
And so for that reason, the green beam at this moment in time remains to be the laser of choice.
And about the wattage of the lasers, do you have units that have higher wattages, or are they all like the same wattages? I'm just curious about that because I know my UV laser here, it's only 5 watts. But just because it's only 5 watts doesn't mean it can't ablate and engrave many materials. It's just not that good at engraving certain materials, but a lot of different materials that have been off the table for me are now open because of the way UV acts. So what is the typical wattage of your machines?
Yeah, you're right. So it does fluctuate, but the beauty is that the power consumption of these lasers is low. It's a low power machine. And so we have many people that use our machines in their living room, running their own side hustle business. It doesn't require huge consumption of amperage or anything of the sort. It's a very low power machine.
Yeah, and there's no fumes that are produced. Am I correct? Because it's all subsurface, so there's no fume extractor. There's nothing like that. As opposed to like engraving on glass with the CO2 laser, we always have to have extraction because there's and the UV laser because there's particulates in the air. But this is all subsurface.
When we talked about Cockpit 3D as the software, we actually provide that to people who are using any subsurface engraver. So it doesn't mean that they would have had to purchase their machine from us. Again, it goes back to the point of collaboration over competition. So if I've been able to achieve something, I believe that, when the tide goes up, all boats rise. And so what we did is we came out with a business model that would enable anyone that bought a subsurface engraver from anywhere to use the software. Of course, there's key benefits to using what we manufacture. But if someone might already have invested in a machine without finding out about us creationally, that doesn't mean that they can't, utilize our software. But we have people that will use it for both subsurface engraving, and to your point, you are able to actually put metal that might have
Analog.
exactly. And they'll be able to etch it. Of course, when you do that, you do start to smell fumes, and it wasn't built for that purpose, but they could do it because what they'll do is they'll simply run it. So they'll say, okay, I want to run it 5 times at the same depth, which is surface depth.
Right.
So they run it the first time, it won't give you that final look because it needs to run a few times in order to get that high quality, but that they aren't able to do it.
I'm sure someone figured that out pretty quick. I feel like we could talk forever about this. It's so cool about the technology, but I want to focus more a little bit, or kind of turn the page here to something you touched on a few minutes ago, which was the early days when you literally had to do 3D scans of people to be able to get that data into the software to make those points with your machine. But nowadays, that has changed dramatically. So to get back to this, so all I did was send you a photo, and I wasn't expecting you to make me one of these. I just was curious about the technology. So all I did was send Riyaz a photo and my logo. That's it. So now you have the ability. You don't need that bulky, expensive 3D LiDAR, whatever it was, to scan people anymore. You have software good enough now to take a flat picture and convert it into 3D. So tell us a little bit about how that came about and what that looks like today.
So when we started, we were using 3D scanners. We would have a projector that would send structured light, similar to like shooting a bucket of clay at someone who's standing up against the wall, except in the digital world, and, getting that 3D plastered look of their face. And then we would also at the same time use that camera to capture textured JPEG, which would be put on top of it. So now you're able to see, what looks to be that family in 3D. And it was so cool because, we're creating this amazing product. And I was really hands-on. So I would be at the forefront, at the festivals, at the fairs, at the tourist environments, actually selling the product. And anybody that gets into business, anybody that wants to buy this machine, I always tell them, your business starts before you'd even put your money into the machine. Go out there, do your market research. And so I was up there, and what I realized was that while people stocked and loved the product, when I told them or offered them the opportunity to get theirs done, they weren't ready because their hair wasn't done. Or at a tourist venue, they're all sweaty for not wearing what they want to be immortalized in crystal. And so I was like, oh man, you know what? Everybody loves it, but I'm only achieving a fraction of the marketplace because either they're not prepared to get it themselves, or they want it as a gift for someone else. And I can't make 3D out of this photo. And so that's where what we ended up doing was figuring out a solution. And again, it's all about collaboration. So I never want to take credit to say that I was the one that came up with how I made the flat image 3D. We did a lot of research. We spoke to a lot in the industry. And what we realized was that, if we dedicated enough training and time, what we could do is we could actually tell a customer, give us a photo. We will model it to 3D, manually, as with 3D artists. And we will then use that 3D model and convert it to a point cloud. And so we did that. We started with 1 designer, and then 3 designers, and then 5 designers. Now, my family's from India back in the day, originally from India. So we ended up, hiring students in the village. And we set up a villa, and we got them to do just the modeling for us. And it grew to now over 200 3D artists at this moment in time that till today are receiving photos. And again, collaboration over competition. They're not just modeling for our pipeline. They're modeling for the shops across Vegas, the shops in Dubai, in Singapore, in UK, laser operators around the world that'll go to the portal, Cockpit 3D. They'll upload their photo. They'll receive a 3D file back in a few hours. So they tell their customers, yep, same day service, but come back later on. They'll be able to then convert that image to a point cloud using the Cockpit 3D software and put it into their laser. So that's where we, got up to in order to being able to do a photo. The third part of it, which we actually employed for your crystal, which I think you sent us a photo and it was on the next flight out. Like it was really, really quick.
Right.
And what we did with yours is very recently, I'd say like within a matter of the last few months, the one benefit was that because we had so many photos that we had meticulously made to 3D, I'm talking thousands, tens of thousands of photos from customers that, we would have asked permission to actually utilize for R&D and development. We could use those photos to now actually do some training and train models so that now if I send a photo into our system, what will happen is it'll calculate it against the trained models that we have done and output something that I would say is pretty much 80% of the work that the 3D artist had to do. So now, instead of it taking hours to do, it's done much, much quicker. And the artist just has a few items that they have to now work on in order to get that model into a laser.
Okay, so you're utilizing artificial intelligence then now. You've got a model that's being trained on all these photos to help you get the meat and potatoes done, and then the final artist goes and touches up any anomalies. Do I got that right?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we started to try to use third-party AI, when we sent photos in, because that was the easiest thing, and that's part of the research. So let's see what's out there. If we could use it, that's great. And so we would send photos, and man, I was so impressed with what I was seeing. It looked great on my screen. But the truth comes when you remove the texture. So remember that 3D camera I told you about where we were taking that digital 3D files, and then you put the texture on top? So you really know the accuracy of a model when you remove the texture. So when we got files back, it looked amazing on the screen, but when we put it through, converting it to a point cloud and burning it, we're like, oh my God, the hands are like just melted. The fingers are melted into one piece, or the nose is flat. Looks like a 3D nose on the screen, but it's actually flat. So when we burn it into a crystal and you look at the crystal from the side, it'll be flat. It's not accurately doing what it needs to do. It's not glasses, for example, completely eyeballs, eye sockets work. So this is where we had to now say, okay, AI, amazing. Say 40 to 50% there already with what's available. How do we now tweak using what we have? And that's where we're able to bring it to the 80%. And I kid you not that, I'm very, very confident that, perhaps the next time you and I speak, it's going to be 100% capable of completing the task exclusively, without the need of any 3D manual modeling. That doesn't mean that part of our mission is to make sure that we're keeping those artists employed. And so it's just a matter of their job function change, like QC, for example, or doing the point cloud side of it. But as far as the tedious task, what would take a long time, far more efficient.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. So it's amazing. It's amazing just how much technology is growing with artificial intelligence and how some of these tools can be beneficial to so many different sectors. So we talked about the software. We talked about the technology behind subsurface engraving. So one of the things I forgot to ask you or wanted to ask you is time. So nowadays, with your current machines, and I know you have a brand new machine, which I'm excited to talk to you about. What are some average times for, say, not including the art prep, not including the software, but when you finally get this in the machine blank and you run the job, how long does it take to run this job?
When I answer that in simple terms, I'll just point to a crystal and I'll say that one took 2 minutes, or that one took 5 minutes, or that one took half an hour. But I know that you have an educated audience, so I want to get a little bit more specific. And so what I would say is that when I first started, a small little, key chain, a small little rectangle, could take, 45 minutes to an hour. Exactly. There you go.
We didn't talk about this yet.
Yeah.
That was
something like that there. It would take a long time and you barely see it because it had so few points in it, but we were achieving something. Now that keychain you're holding was done in 45 seconds. And yeah. And I could have told you it would take a minute and a half. And the reason is because it just depends on how much white is in the photo. So if you were wearing a white shirt in that photo, then it would have taken a little longer because the white means more points. It's the reverse of inkjet printing. When you're printing with an inkjet, white means no ink and black means ink, right? So
Right.
in our world, it's the inverse, as everyone knows. So it would be more points are white, less points as you go towards the grayscale and many black. And so that one took 45 seconds. And the one that you have on your table there, I think, is a 4x6 inch. And that one, would have taken, a few hours originally. Now on our portable machine that we just came out with, that one can be done in like 25 minutes.
Wow. That is impressive. Keep in mind, it's not just engraving on the surface here. It's actually 3-dimensional. So that makes sense. Like for my laser, if I had a 4x6 piece of glass and I just wanted to do a flat photo on it, that would take about 4 minutes. But that's just one plane. That's just one engraving. This is doing thousands, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of little points.
Your head had, I think, over 2 million points. And now
2 million points. And so the DPI matters. You could maybe run the job at a faster speed, but with less fidelity, less resolution. And we get that too here on the channel because we talk about dots per inch, dots, all the time, and how that dramatically affects not only the job time, but the quality of the image as well.
The job time has, I would say a few variables or several levers you could pull. One is how you're going to optimize that JPEG. So the darker it is, the quicker it'll burn. So if you're going to optimize it so you have great, bright contrast where there's contrast needed, and you're going to, affect the burn time. The second area is what you just mentioned is the tightness of the points, right? You refer to it as the DPR. So remember I mentioned 0.07 is what we're achieving. Well, if you decided to go 0.10 of a millimeter, you would have less points. And the third lever I'd say that people pull is the number of layers, because you could burn it so that you have just 5 layers on top of each other to give that pop. You could do 6, 7, most use 8. When you do 8 layers, it makes it very, very solid. But of course, each layer takes time.
Yeah. And we didn't really talk about this, but really quick, let's talk about the glass, because it's not normal glass. It's very specific to achieve these results, right? So what's unique about the type of glass that you supply for I know it comes in different sizes and shapes, but what's unique about this material as opposed to regular glass?
The reason we like optic crystal is, first of all, there's no high value or premium value in crystal. What gives value to it is what you're doing to it. Okay. So that's what I love about this business model is you're taking what is relatively a very low cost raw material that never goes bad and never expires. And you're able to just change the properties using laser bond. No ink, no mess, laser light, and give it incredible value because now it's got their femme, it's got their techie side. This optic crystal, we like it because unlike normal glass, it doesn't have a greenish tip to it. So it's, it's totally clear. And the other thing is that you could use glass. So we do actually, this material, we're able to do thick. Glass generally will achieve a certain amount of thickness or thinness, and then you cannot go as thick as we can go with the optic crystal, that slabs that we cut. Glass has a greenish tint to it, and this doesn't. People ask, though, could we use acrylic? Or they'll say, is it acrylic? And we'll say, well, pick it up, and you'll know because of the...
No, it's not. I can tell you it is heavy and is definitely glass. This is not acrylic.
So the reason why we don't use acrylic is because when the laser strikes and burns, we're not able to get that fine crack in acrylic the way that we get in optic crystal. It's such a fine spot versus in acrylic, not just a spot, but maybe a spot that is melted around spot because of the nature of the property of acrylic, that the resolution doesn't look that good. And finally, I would say that optic crystal, the polish that we're achieving on it. When I say polish, I'm talking about not just Windexing. I'm talking about when you look at the surface with your naked eye, you're not going to notice warps that are on the surface of the glass. And so if we're going to use acrylic, there will be higher chances of warps. And we're not, because when you send a laser and there's a warp, it will refract off of that warp. And so you're not going to actually get a burn at that spot. Versus with this material, that's significantly reduced and it ends up having much less warps. The polish and final finesse of the surface is very close.
Yeah, it's very polished. All the corners are super clean. It's definitely care has been taken into making this cube. One of the exciting things that I saw on because you have your own YouTube channel, you've got your own community that are people that are using your products, and congratulations on that. We'll list links in the description below where you guys can follow Riyaz on his channel. You've got a new product out, and it's much different from some of your other systems. And I wanted to talk a little bit about it because I don't know anything about your previous products. I just know that right now you've got a much more portable and transportable solution. And I'd love for you to just talk about it really quick if you could.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So, traditionally laser machines are heavy, they're large. My first machine costed me to assemble it $168,000 US. So that was the barrier to entry. Was number one, the price point. Number two was the size confined me to having to keep it at one location and work from that location. And of course, the third thing was, the idea of telling the customer, come back at the end of the day to pick up your order. That impulse or sudden gratification is something that we need to achieve. So 3 things. The solution to closing that gap was to be able to come out with something that was portable. So I wouldn't have to wait for a customer to come to me, but I could actually take the machine to the customer. That was one. Number 2 was price points and bringing the price points so it would be significantly less than what originally it was, and the speed, being able to tell a customer, hey, give me a photo now and walk away with it in minutes.
So, like this.
Exactly.
Or maybe even a little bit bigger, up to the 2x2. Those probably are done pretty quick, if you have a little 2x2 cube, other ones. But anyway, Go ahead.
Very, very quick. So it was a drawing and just a dream, but we made it into a reality. And we're very excited to be able to offer the world the 3D Laser Box Jet Mini. And this machine is something that, comes in a Pelican case. You're able to roll it wherever you want to take it, be it tabletop events, festivals, fairs, corporate events. People booked to have you take your machine out and do it for their guests as well. Portability of it. It's got the whole AI integration. So now a customer from their mobile device into Crystal in minutes. So they send a photo from their device through to the page. It converts, drops to the laser, and burns it. That keychain you were showing, they can have died and walk away with in under 5 minutes. And the third
That's
thing,
huge.
It's huge. It's incredible. I mean, the number of people that swarm when we're at an event showcasing this is very encouraging. And the third thing is the price point. I have been a huge advocate of entrepreneurialism, of getting children involved in business at a young age. So for those that are running their own business, in fact, if someone asks me, what do you do? And I have my child next to me, I will tell them that, ask them, what do I do? And tell them, what does daddy do? And they will say what I do. Right. So what I wanted to do was come up with a machine that for any entrepreneur would be able to achieve their ROI and get this under 90 days. That's the idea. Okay. So you paid your machine off another 90 days. I don't guarantee it because everybody hustles differently. But, with the price point on this machine, that ranges between $20,000 to $30,000 in terms of your options. And what we're able to achieve, one of our first 5 purchasers of this machine got his ROI in 27 days, selling it simply at Christmas to Christmas audiences. There was another that took it to a 10-day festival, and every day was doing an average of $2,900. So some days it would be 25, other days it would be 3,000, but the average is 29. In 10 days, $29,000 of top line sales. That was the other thing, was low barrier to entry so that, families can run it as family businesses and entrepreneurs can make their money.
Yeah, I talk about this in my consultations sometimes. It's the laser equipment is part of it. You have to have the tool to get the job done, but an even bigger part of it is, doing your market research, finding out where you're going to go, getting your hustle on, getting out there and getting in the spot so you can start offering your services, promoting yourself, making those sales calls, getting those leads, getting those jobs. It only takes seconds to make the product. The real work comes in the footwork and everything else that you have to do. So, just because you have a laser engraving machine or just because you have a subsurface laser engraver doesn't mean that now you're in the money, and there's nothing wrong if you can't make your money back with any of these machines I just mentioned in 90 days. That doesn't mean you're failing. That's just a goal that you could go for. Sometimes, depending on your area, depending on your availability, how much can you hustle? How much time do you have to dedicate to your new business? And for some people, they may make their money back in the first year. And as far as I'm concerned, that's great. You did it in 1 year. That's amazing. You did it in 90 days. That's stellar. You know what I mean? But it doesn't mean that
the creativity is so true. Everything that you just said is just so bang on. It's like, even before someone buys the machine, I tell them, before you've purchased or before you've received your machine, your business is already started. Go up, look at all the events that, let's say right now, there's a 3-month wait on this machine. Okay. So I'm telling people that just bought it last week, I'm telling them, look at shows that are happening in 4 months from now and identify which ones you would have talked to the show organizer, find out the cost of the rent, what traffic they have. I have one person that's so creative, she ends up going to the daycares. And she goes to daycares because that's the only place where a parent actually goes in to pick up their child. Otherwise, at elementary schools and high schools, the children come up. She puts a display up, 3D photo session happening this Friday. Anyone that wants to opt out can opt out. She's able to, at a small school, get orders of $800. And at a large school, $3,000. And what she does is she gives 15% back to the school. So they're making more than they would at a bake sale. And they book her. They love it. They book her throughout. So she's smart because she's not only doing the tabletops on weekends, but on the weekdays, she's busy with this machine, handling daycare. But so it's bound to the creativity of your own imagination.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited to see where this product goes. This has been really great talking to you. And it's definitely solidified and answered questions that I thought I had the answer to or was very close to how this subsurface laser engraving works. Some of it I was not right on and some of it I was on the right path. Either way, my channel is all about laser engraving, whether it's subsurface, on the surface, different lasers. And so I knew I had to have you on. So before we go, why don't you let everybody know where they can find you, whether it's on YouTube, your website. If they want to contact you, we'll list links below. And if they're interested in checking out one of your units, adding it to their existing business, starting a new business, tell us where to go.
I appreciate that. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel to see a little bit of my story. I like to share what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. LinkedIn is where I'm active as well. You can find me on Instagram, and I guess you'll post the handles below. Michael, I also want to offer, first of all, I appreciate you inviting me. I love what you're doing for your audience and everything that you're sharing. I'd love to offer your audience, some sort of an incentive if they wanted to purchase a 3D crystal as a gift. I know you already mentioned the domain is 3dcrystal.com, but what we'll do is we'll also set up a coupon code. I don't know when this is going to be airing, but Laser911 is your YouTube channel. So we'll make the coupon code Laser911. Sound good? Okay. And they're ready. And talk the details, and you could just post the details of what their discount will be if they put
for sure. That's great. Well, Riyaz, thanks again for coming by. I look forward to watching your company and seeing it grow. And I don't know, I might have to maybe add some of these products to my existing laser engraving business in the showroom. And I might be talking to you a little bit about that too.
Woohoo! Love it.
All right. See you around.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.